December 17, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. The air is heavy with the scent of unburnt diesel and freezing mist. On a narrow, ice-slicked road leading towards Saint-Vith, the lead Panther tank of a German armoured column grinds to a sudden, violent halt. The silence that follows is heavier than the roar of the engine. The commander does not stop because he sees an explosion. He stops because he sees a pattern. A patch of freshly turned earth, slightly darker than the surrounding snow. A generic white ceramic plate, overturned and half buried in the mud. Beside it, a discarded American ammunition crate. To the untrained eye, it is battlefield debris. To a veteran Panzer crew, it is a death sentence waiting to be triggered. The column waits. Precious fuel burns. The momentum of the massive German counteroffensive bleeds away, minute by agonizing minute, as combat pioneers creep forward to probe the ground with bayonets. They will eventually discover that the earth hides nothing but scraps of metal and empty air. But the delay has already done its work. This was the invisible war, where a hole in the ground was often as effective as high explosives. By the late autumn of 1944, the Allied advance across Europe had begun to outrun its own shadow. The lightning speed of the breakout from Normandy and the liberation of Paris had stretched supply lines to their breaking point. The Red Ball Express, the massive truck convoy system ferrying fuel and ammunition to the front, was struggling to keep pace with General Patton's thirst for gasoline. As the winter snows began to settle over the Belgian-German border, the Allied armies ground to a halt along the Siegfried Line. The optimism of being home by Christmas had been replaced by the grim reality of a cold, static winter war. The Ardennes sector, a quiet region of dense pine forests and rolling hills, was known to American commanders as the Ghost Front. It was considered a rest area, a place where battered divisions went to lick their wounds, and green units were sent to get their first taste of trench life without the intensity of major combat. The intelligence consensus was absolute. The German army was broken, incapable of mounting any significant offensive operation. But on the other side of the line, under the strictest secrecy, the Wehrmacht was assembling the last great mechanized force of the Third Reich. Hitler's plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, was a desperate gamble predicated on a single, non-negotiable variable: speed. The German objective was the port of Antwerp, essential to splitting the British and American armies. To reach it, massive columns of King Tigers, Panthers and Panzer IVs had to traverse the narrow, winding roads of the Ardennes before the Allied air forces could take advantage of clearing skies to destroy them. For the German High Command, time was more valuable than ammunition. Their fuel reserves were critically low, estimated to sustain combat operations for only a matter of 12 days. Any delay-a-blown bridge, a stubborn roadblock, or a minefield was not merely a tactical annoyance, it was a strategic disaster. The entire offensive relied on the shock of the initial assault and the rapid movement of armour through key road junctions like Saint-Vith and Bastogne. Facing this impending avalanche were the scattered units of the US First Army. Among the most vital, yet often overlooked assets in these divisions were the combat engineers. These men were the architects of the battlefield. Their doctrine was clear: mobility for friendly forces, counter-mobility for the enemy. In a defensive posture, their primary tool was the anti-tank mine. The standard American M1A1 mine was a distinct metal disc packed with TNT, designed to shear the tracks off a tank, immobilizing it instantly. However, as the German offensive erupted in the pre-dawn darkness of December 16, 1944, American engineers faced a catastrophic logistical reality. They were critically short of ordnance. The supply depots were miles to the rear, and the chaos of the surprise attack meant that convoys carrying mines were often ambushed or rerouted. An engineer platoon might be ordered to block a 2-mile stretch of highway with only enough mines to cover 200 yards. This scarcity forced a shift in tactical thinking. The engineers understood the German psychological state. They knew the enemy was terrified of immobilization. A disabled tank in a narrow column became a roadblock for every vehicle behind it. Therefore, the German drivers and commanders were hyper-vigilant, trained to scan the road surface for the telltale signs of American engineering work. The American engineers realized that they did not necessarily need to destroy the German tanks to stop them. They simply needed to convince the German commanders that the road ahead might destroy them. If a Panzer column halted to sweep a road, the result was the same as if they had been hit. They were not moving. In the zero-sum game of the Ardennes, minutes bought were lives saved. Thus, the strategy of the mixed field was born, a desperate improvisation where psychology replaced high explosives, and the appearance of danger became as lethal as the danger itself. The geography of the Ardennes acted as a force multiplier for any defensive action. This was not the open steppe of the Eastern Front or the desert hardpan of North Africa, where armour could manoeuvre freely. The road network in eastern Belgium consisted of narrow, paved tracks, winding through steep ravines, flanked by dense timber and soft, marshy ground that could swallow a 60-ton Tiger tank to its hull. A single disabled vehicle could effectively seal a route for hours. For the German Panzer divisions, specifically the elite 1st SS Panzer Division and the 12th SS Panzer Division, the road was their lifeline. If they left the hard surface, they bogged down. If they stayed on the road, they were vulnerable to the bottleneck. This tactical reality placed an immense psychological burden on German lead elements. The point man carried the weight of the entire division's progress. They knew that American doctrine emphasized the use of obstacles to channel enemy forces into kill zones covered by anti-tank guns and artillery. However, the chaos of the Bulge meant that organized kill zones were rare. Instead, American resistance was often characterized by small, isolated groups of infantry and engineers fighting delaying actions to buy time for reinforcements to arrive. The shortage of real mines was acute. Standard operating procedure for a deliberate minefield required hundreds of mines laid in a specific density to ensure a high probability of a strike. In December 1944, US engineer battalions often found themselves with less than 10% of the required ordnance. A platoon might be tasked with defending a critical crossroads with only a dozen M1A1 metallic mines and a crate of M7 light anti-tank mines. Used conventionally, these would cover a frontage of perhaps 30 feet, which was useless against a mechanized column that could simply bypass such a small strip. To compensate, American engineers began to weaponize the German soldier's own training against him. German combat pioneers were highly skilled and disciplined. They were trained to recognize the visual signatures of a hasty minefield, the darker, subsurface soil brought to the top, the withered vegetation where sod had been cut, and the slight geometric regularity that betrayed human interference. The Americans realized that if they could replicate these visual cues without the explosives, the effect on the enemy's tempo would be nearly identical to that of a live field. The order went out to extend the fields. This was not a standardized instruction from a high-level manual, but a battlefield adaptation born of desperation. Engineers were instructed to lay their real mines in unpredictable clusters rather than standard rows, and to fill the gaps with anything that could simulate a buried explosive. This required a deep understanding of what the enemy expected to see. If the deception was too obvious, the Germans would drive right through it. If it was too subtle, they might miss it entirely and accidentally discover it was fake. The fake had to look exactly like a real mistake, a mine that had been buried just poorly enough to be noticed by a sharp-eyed driver. The stakes were incredibly high. If a German column called the Bluff and rolled through a section of fake mines without detonating anything, the credibility of the entire barrier system would collapse. The enemy would become bolder, surging forward with reckless speed. Therefore, the deception had to be anchored in reality. There had to be enough real explosions to maintain the fear. The Phoney Minefield could not be entirely phony. It had to be a game of Russian roulette, played with tank tracks. As the Panzers rolled west, aiming for the Meuse River, they began to encounter these strange hybrid defences. A stretch of road would show the clear signs of tampering. The lead tank would halt. The radio chatter would spike. The pioneers would move up with their mine detectors and probes, sweating in the freezing cold, treating a buried soup plate with the same terrifying reverence as a 10-pound charge of TNT. And all the while the clock ticked, the fuel burned, and the Allied reinforcements drew closer. The first and most brutal reality for the American combat engineer in the Ardennes was the ground itself. By late December, the temperature had plummeted well below freezing, turning the damp Belgian soil into a substance with the density of concrete. To bury a single M1A1 mine required a hole roughly 8 inches in diameter and 4 inches deep. Under normal conditions, this was the work of minutes. In the frozen Ardennes, it was an exhausting, back-breaking ordeal involving pickaxes and frantic chipping, often performed under the looming threat of artillery fire. For the men of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, who would gain fame for holding the northern shoulder of the Bulge, every hole dug was a calorie-burning marathon in a landscape devoid of warmth. They faced a cruel calculus. They could not physically dig fast enough to lay a standard density minefield before the German columns arrived. The earth simply refused to yield. This physical limitation, as much as the shortage of explosives, drove the adoption of the phony field. It was significantly easier to scratch the surface of the ground to create the appearance of a hole than to actually excavate one. The engineers learned to work with the snow. A real mine required careful camouflage. The snow had to be swept away, the sod cut, the mine armed, and the snow replaced so artfully that it looked undisturbed. But for a fake mine, the engineers did the opposite. They deliberately created tells. They would sweep the snow away and replace it haphazardly, leaving a dark smudge of soil against the white background. To a German driver peering through a vision slit 200 yards away, that dark smudge signalled danger. The engineers were effectively painting stop signs on the road using nothing but dirt. As the supply of real anti-tank mines dwindled to critical levels, American troops raided the abandoned farmhouses and villages of the Belgian countryside for substitutes. The most famous improvisation involved the humble ceramic soup plate. To a terrifying degree, a standard white porcelain dinner plate, when overturned, mimics the shape and diameter of a telemine or an American M1A1. Engineers would bury these plates just beneath the surface of the road or the soft shoulder. When a German combat pioneer swept the area with a mine detector, the ceramic would obviously not register. However, the Americans added a devilish twist. They placed jagged scraps of metal, ration can lids, shrapnel, or nails underneath the plates or scattered in the hole. The result was a chaotic acoustic signature. The German mine detector would scream, indicating metal. The pioneer would drop to his knees to probe the ground with a bayonet or a non-magnetic rod. He would feel the solid, artificial resistance of the ceramic plate. In that moment, the pioneer had to make a life or death decision. Was it a mine? The detector said yes. The probe said yes. The visual evidence said yes. To verify it was a fake, he had to dig it up. He had to gently excavate the frozen mud around the object, exposing it fully to ensure it wasn't booby-trapped with an anti-handling device. Only after 10 or 15 minutes of heart-stopping work would he pull a dinner plate out of the mud. He would curse, throw it aside, and move a few feet forward to the next signal, where the entire terrifying process would begin again. The Americans didn't need the plate to explode. They needed the 15 minutes. Inside a German Panzer, the world was reduced to narrow, thick glass vision blocks. The environment was claustrophobic, noisy, and smelling of oil and sweat. For the tank commander, situational awareness was a constant struggle. In the dense forests of the Ardennes, visibility was often less than 50 yards. This blindness amplified the psychological threat of the mine. The German crews knew that the American M1A1 mine was not designed to destroy the tank entirely. It was designed to break the track. But in the context of the Blitzkrieg, a mobility kill was effectively a total loss. A tank with a broken track on a single-lane road could not be towed easily. It became a 60-ton bunker, blocking the entire division behind it. Recovery vehicles were scarce, and under the threat of Allied fighter bombers, stationary targets were dead targets. This reality bred a deep institutional paranoia. Every shadow on the road, every pile of leaves, every patch of fresh snow became a potential catastrophe. The American tactic of mixing fake mines with real ones exploited this specific anxiety. If a commander ordered his driver to ignore a suspicious patch and drive through it, he was gambling his life and his unit's momentum. If he was wrong and the track shattered, he faced not only enemy fire, but the wrath of his superiors for halting the offensive. Thus, the safe option, stopping to sweep, became the default reaction, exactly as the Americans intended. The mere possibility of a mine achieved the tactical goal of the mine itself. While buried mines relied on concealment, American engineers also employed a tactic of brazen visibility known as the daisy chain. This involved tying a series of mines, usually 4 or 5, together with a long rope or detonating cord. The mines were hidden in a ditch or culvert on the side of the road, while the engineers lay in wait, holding the other end of the rope. When an enemy column approached, the engineers would yank the rope, sliding the string of mines directly across the asphalt in front of the lead tank. It was a crude, aggressive move, but devastatingly effective. It forced the lead tank to slam on its brakes instantly. The genius of the daisy chain lay in its ambiguity. Often, in the desperate shortages of the Bulge, engineers would tie together dummy mines, empty crates, or even logs painted olive drab. In the dim light of winter dusk, a German driver seeing dark shapes sliding across the road didn't stop to analyze their composition. He stopped because the road was blocked. This forced the German infantry to dismount and clear the obstacles under the cover of American small arms fire. Even if the mines were just painted blocks of wood, the tank could not move until a brave soldier had walked up to them, physically lifted them, and confirmed they were inert. By then, the ambush was already underway. December 18, 1944. The road between Stavelot and Malmedy. The situation is critical. Kampfgruppe Piper, the armoured spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division, has broken through the initial American lines. Their destination is the Meuse River, and their path runs directly through a handful of hastily assembled roadblocks manned by the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion. Lieutenant Colonel David Pergrin's men are not frontline infantry. They are builders, bridge makers, and road fixers. But today, they are the only thing standing between the German Panzers and the limitless fuel depots of the American rear. A small squad of engineers works frantically on a blind curve in the road, flanked by a steep wooded embankment on one side and a drop-off on the other. It is the perfect choke point. They have only 8 real M1A1 anti-tank mines left, enough to cover barely a quarter of the road's width if spaced correctly. The sergeant in charge makes the call. They will not space them correctly. They dig 3 holes in a diagonal line across the right lane, burying the live mines. The snow is scraped back, the earth chopped with pickaxes. In the left lane, they dig 4 more holes. But into these they place nothing but stones and empty ration cans, covering them loosely with dirt. Then, 10 yards further back, they place the remaining 5 real mines in a tight cluster, directly where a tank would swerve to avoid the first set of decoys. The sound of the enemy arrives before they do, a low grinding vibration that shakes the pine needles from the trees. It is the distinctive, terrifying clatter of interleaved road wheels, a king tiger. The engineers scatter into the tree line, clutching their carbines and bazookas, burying themselves in the snow. They are vastly outgunned. Their only hope is the psychology of the road surface. The lead German vehicle, a Panther tank, rounds the bend. Its turret rotates slowly, the long 75mm barrel scanning the tree line. The commander is buttoned up, peering through the periscope. He sees it immediately. The dark, rhythmic scarring of the road surface ahead. The Panther brakes hard, its tracks locking and sliding on the ice. The entire column behind is half-tracks, trucks, self-propelled guns, still scopes into a halt. Engines idle. Shouting erupts in German. The ambush has not fired a single shot, yet the attack has stopped dead. From the tree line, the American engineers watch, breath misting in the freezing air. They check their watches. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3. Every second the tracks are not turning is a victory. Then the hatch of the Panther opens. 2 figures in field grey jump down. Combat pioneers. They move forward in a crouch, mine detectors sweeping left and right. The detector whines over the first hole, the fake one with the ration cans. The pioneer stops, marks it with white tape, and signals back to the tank. Mine. He moves to the next. Silence. He probes the ground. Nothing. He looks confused. He moves to the third patch. A reel. Mine. The detector screams. Mine. The pattern makes no sense to him. It defies the German field manual. Is it a minefield? Is it debris? The uncertainty freezes them. The pioneer waves for his partner to bring the prodder. They are now on their knees, 500 yards from the American hiding spots, dissecting a puzzle that doesn't exist. The engineers grip their weapons. The trap is set, but the tension is unbearable. If the Germans realize the bluff, they will roll forward and massacre the squad. If they stay halted, the American tank destroyers racing up from the rear might just get there in time. The German pioneer prying at the frozen mud suddenly stops. He reaches into the hole and pulls out not a lethal disc of steel, but a battered, rust-streaked tin can. He holds it up for the tank commander to see, his breath pluming in the cold air. A wave of visible relief, followed instantly by irritation, sweeps through the German crew. It is a bluff, a trick. The Americans are playing games. The commander, already under immense pressure from the timeline, makes a fatal assumption. If the first hole was fake, and the second hole was fake, the entire barrier is likely a sham. A desperate attempt by retreating troops to slow him down without expending ammunition they don't have. He cannot afford to wait for the pioneers to check every single patch of disturbed earth on the road to the Meuse. He waves the pioneers away. Vorwärts, forward. The Maybach engine of the Panther roars to life, spitting black smoke. The gears grind, and the 60-ton beast lurches forward, its tracks crushing the snow. It rolls right over the next patch of disturbed earth. Nothing happens. The commander's confidence surges. He was right. It is a phantom minefield. He orders the driver to pick up speed to make up for the lost minutes. The tank accelerates, clattering toward the second cluster of spots, the ones the engineers had placed with specific, malicious intent. The driver, emboldened by the lack of explosions, steers slightly to the left to avoid a large crater, placing his right track directly onto the seemingly random patch of loose gravel the engineers had prepared. The explosion is not a cinematic fireball. It is a sharp, cracking thunderclap that slaps the air. A geyser of black dirt and snow erupts from under the tank's right side. The M1A1 mine detonates with enough force to shatter the hardened steel pins connecting the track links. The heavy metal belt snaps instantly. Kinetic energy takes over. With the right track severed and the left track still driving, the tank violently slews to the right. It skids uncontrollably across the ice, slamming broadside into the steep embankment and burying its nose in the ditch. The engine stalls. The silence returns, but it is different now. It is the silence of a corked bottle. The road is effectively sealed. The lead tank is now a 60-ton immovable object wedged diagonally across the only drivable surface. The rest of the column behind it, miles of armor and trucks, slams on the brakes. From the tree line, the American engineers initiate the second phase of the trap. A bazooka team breaks cover, firing a rocket into the engine deck of the immobilized Panther to ensure it cannot be recovered. Machine gun fire rakes the pioneers who are still exposed on the road. The Germans scramble for cover, diving into the ditches. Confusion reigns. The German column cannot move forward because of the wreck. They cannot move backward because the road is too narrow to turn around. They are trapped in a linear kill zone. Artillery observers on the ridge radio the coordinates. Within minutes, American 105mm shells begin to rain down on the stationary column. The deception has succeeded beyond the wildest hopes of the squad leader. The mix of fake and real mines did not just disable one tank, it paralyzed a regiment. The German commander screams into his radio, demanding recovery vehicles, demanding support. But it is too late. The sun is setting, the momentum is gone. For the want of a clear road, the battle is shifting. The destruction of the lead Panther was not merely a mechanical loss, it was a contagion. As the burning chassis blocked the road, the paralysis spread backward down the column like a nervous system shock. What began as a single squad of engineers and a handful of mineshaft of them inert, transformed into a strategic catastrophe for the 6th Panzer Army. When the skies finally cleared on December 23rd, the Allied Tactical Air Forces, P-47 Thunderbolts and RAF Typhoons, looked down to see German columns backed up bumper to bumper on the winding roads of the Ardennes, stationary targets sitting in the snow. They had been halted not by a wall of steel, but by a psychological barrier. The Phoney Minefields had forced the German commanders to trade mobility for security, and in doing so, they had lost both. The efficiency of the German advance plummeted. American after-action reports from the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion noted that sections of road defended by mixed fields compelled the enemy to dismount and sweep by hand, reducing their advance from 20 miles per hour to less than 1 mile per hour. In the race for Antwerp, where the entire German offensive schedule was calculated in minutes, these lost hours were fatal. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, would later reflect on the friction of the battle. He noted that while American anti-tank fire was deadly, it was the passive defense, the roadblocks, the craters, and the minefields that robbed his tanks of their primary advantage: speed. The German crews began to suffer from a unique form of combat fatigue. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, terrified of ground that looked perfectly innocent. The psychological weight of the mixed field meant that even after a road was declared clear, drivers hesitated. They drove slower. They swung wide at corners. They second-guessed their own pioneers. The The casualty reports from these specific engagements were often lopsided. A handful of American engineers, having delayed a regiment for half a day, would slip away into the woods to set up the next ambush. Meanwhile, the German units left behind burning vehicles and exhausted crews who had spent the night probing frozen mud for soup plates. The Ghost Front had become a haunted house, where the fear of the weapon was far more effective than the weapon itself. By January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was effectively over. The German offensive had been strangled by its own logistical failures and the stubborn resistance of small American units. However, the lessons learned in the frozen forests of Belgium were not discarded. They were codified. The mixed minefield evolved from a desperate improvisation into a recognized tactical doctrine for the final invasion of Germany. American engineers, now pushing toward the Rhine, used deception to conserve their own massive stockpiles for the main breaches. They realized that in the chaos of a collapsing Reich, the German defenders were even more susceptible to psychological manipulation. Signs marked Achtung Minen were often placed in completely empty fields to channel German retreats or secure flanks without burying a single explosive. The Bluff became a standard tool in the Allied arsenal. Conversely, the Germans, now fighting on their own soil with dwindling resources, attempted to replicate the tactic. But they lacked the one thing the Americans had possessed in the Ardennes: credibility. The Americans knew the Germans were out of explosives. When American columns encountered suspicious earth in March and April 1945, they often simply deployed flail tanks, Shermans equipped with rotating chainstow, to beat the ground and detonate whatever was there, fake or real. The deception required the threat of force to back it up, and the Wehrmacht no longer had the force. The legacy of the soup plate mine extended far beyond World War II. It fundamentally altered the philosophy of counter-mobility operations. Military planners understood that the goal of a minefield was not necessarily to kill tanks, but to buy time. If a cardboard box could buy the same amount of time as a magnetic mine, it was, tactically speaking, of equal value. The battlefield had ceased to be purely physical. It had become a contest of perception. As the Allied armies crossed the Rhine and the final curtain began to fall on the European theatre, the roads were littered with the detritus of these mind games. In the mud of the Ardennes, buried beneath the melting snow, lay thousands of ceramic plates, ration cans, and blocks of wood-silent monuments to the moment when the American soldier stopped the German war machine not with firepower, but with a lie. War is often measured in tonnage. The weight of bombs dropped, the caliber of shells fired, the thickness of armor plate. History tends to focus on the industrial titans, the Tiger tanks, the flying fortresses, the atomic bombs. These are the visible instruments of destruction, the undeniable proofs of power. But the story of the Ardennes minefields reveals a quieter, more subtle truth about conflict. The most effective weapon is often the human mind. The American engineer, freezing in a foxhole with nothing but a pickaxe and a dinner plate, understood something that the German high command had forgotten. He understood that a tank is only as powerful as the confidence of its crew. By destroying that confidence, by planting the seed of doubt in the mind of the enemy commander, he achieved what thousands of rounds of ammunition could not. He turned the enemy's own instinct for self-preservation into a cage. The Phoney Minefield was the ultimate asymmetry. It cost nothing to produce, but cost the enemy everything to defeat. It proved that in the chaotic friction of battle, ingenuity can stalemate industry. The German war machine, built on the doctrine of speed and violence, was brought to a halt not by a wall of steel, but by a psychological phantom, a ghost in the snow. Today, the roads of the Ardennes are quiet. The forests have regrown, and the scars of the foxholes have softened into the landscape. But if you were to take a metal detector to those old logging trails, you would find the remnants of that desperate winter. You would find the rusted casings of real mines, deadly even after 80 years. And beside them, you would find the shattered remains of ceramic plates and rusted tin cans, the silent, enduring punchlines to a deadly joke that helped save the free world. It serves as a lasting reminder that while wars are fought with weapons, they are won by men. And sometimes, the bravest thing a soldier can do is not to fire a gun, but to simply dig a hole and let the enemy's fear do the rest.